what is the current status of where things stand on this potential rail strike? I know there was a vote in the House yesterday that passed. What are you hearing about the potential of the Senate passing something as well?
Yeah, so we do expect the Senate will vote on this issue today, and there's two different bills. One concerns, rail workers. You have to adopt this tentative agreement that was brokered by the White House in September. You're not allowed to strike. This is your agreement. Get back to work. Well, they're still at work, but that's it. No more strike possibility. That's the first bill that's being voted on. It's pretty likely that will pass. The second bill that they're voting on, there's a little bit more uncertainty around that. That is around this idea of 7 days of paid sick leave. And this is the big issue that rail workers have been fighting for these past few years, is this idea that they do not have paid sick leave. They do have many weeks, in some cases, of paid time off, but they're not able to flexibly use that in the case of a medical issue or a family emergency or something along those lines.
So let's say that I have the flu and I can't leave my house for whatever reason. What do I do if I'm a rail worker right now?
Depending on where you work, you may actually be penalized in the case of saying, hey, I can't take this shift right now. I can't come to work. You could receive some sort of penalty or even risk getting fired if you say, I cannot come to this shift that you're calling me into right now.
So let's say that Congress ends up passing the first bill and you have this strike averted. Am I wrong in thinking that there still is going to be an awful lot of bad taste in the mouths of the rail workers and that things may not be quite back to normal? Like it would strike me that would not necessarily sit well with a lot of those workers.
Yeah, absolutely. The union leadership, and of course, union leadership and what these 115,000 plus workers feel, those can't be conflated all the time. But the union leadership is really pushing for their right to have a strike. There is a lot of discontentment, as you mentioned, among these rail workers. So the idea that it's just, okay, you didn't get the chance to have a strike, you didn't get a chance to, really work out the end of this negotiation process, that definitely will leave a bad taste in a lot of rail workers' mouths. The other side of this is that this doesn't, address all of their issues or solve all their problems. This contract does provide for a really meaningful pay increase, but it's still years and years of challenges with this job that has really gotten worse since the late 2010s and through COVID.
Why are the railroads so hesitant to provide even a handful, like even 3 days of paid time off for sick leave? What's the hang up there? It doesn't seem like that's anything crazy to say. Yes, we'd like to have the ability to call in sick if we need to. Why can't they go along with that?
Yeah, that's really been the big question that a lot of people watching this debate have been scratching their heads on. But one explanation is that these rail companies have really lost a lot of workers, both because of COVID and sort of the quote labor shortage that many companies are dealing with, but also because at the end, through the mid to late 2010s, a lot of these rail companies adopted a strategy called precision scheduled railroading that resulted in a lot of them laying off and furloughing their employees because they wanted to really reduce their expenses and move as much freight as possible with as little equipment and as few workers as possible. And that was really great, when things were normal, when things were well. It didn't really give them a lot of, padding or stability. Fine, whatever. Not a lot of stability. That could be fine for normal times. Unfortunately, obviously, in early 2020, we saw a cataclysmic, unusual, hopefully once in a lifetime shock to the system. And that sort of low staff model really was tested. And following, of course, the decrease in volumes in early 2020, rail companies laid off even more staffers. So then by mid 2020 to late 2020, when volume started to rebound, return to some state of normalcy, rail companies had so few workers and an actually normal amount of volume. So those workers who were still there were really pushed to work as much as they could, were on call as much as possible. So the idea that they could, have some sort of flexibility, take time off, take sick leave, that was something that would simply not work in the rail company's model.
Rachel, let's turn now and talk just briefly about what's going on in the retail sector. We've heard an awful lot about inventory buildup over the last couple of quarters. I think it was really Q2 was where it started to become apparent that some companies had just gotten completely out of whack with inventories, ordering too much, expecting that demand from 21 to continue. What are we seeing right now, and how does that affect, kind of what you're seeing in terms of demand for either rail or trucking transportation?
Yeah, so as you've mentioned, inventories have significantly built up. And as a result, we're not seeing, especially on the trucking side, this is normally the peak season for trucking companies. This is normally their go time. They're seeing elevated rates, elevated volumes. And instead, we're seeing pretty low volumes, pretty low rates. By all measures, we are skipping that so-called peak season. This is definitely challenging for smaller trucking firms as well as larger public ones. And meanwhile, with these reduced rates in terms of pay for truck drivers and trucking companies, we're also seeing pretty high diesel rates. They have come down in the last few months, but it's a really challenging time for trucking companies because you have reduced pay, but you also have increased costs.
Very good. Rachel, appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much for the time.